Hello, I'm Spike Viper, and this is Spike Codes, and let's go over something that confuses a lot of people, which is the different lifetimes of services. More specifically, when you inject services, or at least when you declare them here, this is my program file for Valor, which is a pretty large project, so that I can kind of demonstrate the quantity of services you can get to. And if you like services, which you should, and use dependency injection, which you should, this is an important concept to understand. So you can see that I actually have several different kinds of services being used here. I have singletons and I have scoped. But what is the difference? So singletons, you should probably, if you're object-oriented programming, already know what a singleton is. It's when you have a single instance of an object. And it's the same thing with services. There is a single instance, I just clicked on the wrong thing. There is a single instance of this node service per program. And this is being run on a server, and you can probably understand why there would only be one node service, where each server is a node, on a server. Basically, each process only needs one because this handles the lifetime, it handles the event plane of the server, and they only need one. It's fine if everything shares this one instance. There are some things that I have to keep in mind because it is a singleton. For example, when you have a singleton service and you have something like a dictionary and something inside of it, you should be using the concurrent version unless you're 100% sure that you're not going to be creating any race conditions on trying to access things between different threads, because that service, if it's being injected in multiple places that are being hit by multiple threads, is going to still be the same instance. It's a singleton. So that's pretty simple. The complicated thing is people get tripped up between scoped and transient. And this is actually super useful, super useful. You can do some really cool things if you understand how scoped services work. So let's say I have a user and I have an application. And when I am doing this application, there are, let's say, 3 requests. The user calls login, and then the user calls get data, and these are all routes on the application, and then the user calls logout. In scoped services, let's say there's a user service, and the user service is used for all 3 of these, right? And it is, here's our requests. So there's 3 different requests. Each request is going to be isolated. So in a scoped service, it is per request. And so if we have time going down this way, multiple things can happen in one request. So let's say, for example, we do database.getUser, right? So we got the user, and that uses users.find whatever the condition is, probably the primary key. And then we do, let's say we set the login time. And then let's say for some reason we have, when you log in, it gets the user and it sets the login time. And then in another service, so let's say this is one service here that's being called on login. Login service, we'll just call the first one login service, and then another service gets called. What's something else that could happen on login? Let's say that it sends a notification to your friends. There's a notification service that sends a notification to your friends that you're online now. So maybe this service now does db.getUser. It's getting your user again, and then it's inserting a notification. The really neat thing about this is if you're using a scoped database, which in my case, you will notice that when I'm adding my database, which is somewhere, wow, it doesn't say add scoped, but this is scoped. I didn't show it anyways. I forgot to hide the iPad, but trust me, the database is scoped. And so these databases are actually the same instance. It is using the same instance across this get user and this get user. So when that first one calls, when it calls your database.find, it is actually going to cache the user. And so the second time it calls get user, it's already there. It doesn't have to hit the database again. Entity Framework handles this very well. If you're using find async, it is going to use the cached user. So this is actually getting reused. And it's because it's scoped. The same database connection can be used in the same entity framework context, can be used across different services in that same request, which is super useful. Super useful. Because, for example, in my code, I have my layers like most applications do. So, for example, channel API, when I want to post a message, and you see this here, if that's confusing you, you're like, I've never seen that before. It's because it's custom attributes I made for handling permissions and routes. So that's my, if you want to know how those work, I can make another video showing my custom systems. But anyways, when someone wants to post a message, there's two things. There's the API, and the API layer handles two things. One, getting the request to the root. And two, checking permissions. If you have permission to do it, it doesn't even call the service if you don't have permission. The service does not handle permissions. That is the API's job. So you'll see that we get the current token of the user, and then we do some checks for security. And then we get the member, we get permissions, blah, blah, blah. And then we call the service, right? But the service here, the channel service, because we verified that they can actually do this, when we actually try to do this in the service, you're going to notice that this is actually, yes, no, that's correct. Oh, yes. Okay. So you'll notice that here we are going to actually go ahead and get these things again. I mean, we're getting the user here, but we probably already have gotten the user when we got their member. And if we look at the token service and how it works, you can actually see that I get the HTTP context accessor here. And when I get the current token, I actually have a cached one. I have a cached current token, and if it's already been gotten, I just return it. And if not, I do the expensive part of actually ripping it out. I rip the key out of the cookie, and I go ahead and I grab it from the actual token from the database. But most of the time, there has already been a key grabbed. I've already done this, you know. I may check 5 different permissions, and the first time it'll grab this token, but the other 4 times it's all within the same request. So it's scoped. It doesn't have to do it again. And it's the same thing in the user service. When we get that user, even though we get the user in the API and then we get the user in the service, that may sound wasteful, but it's not, because the get current user async is going to go into the this service, and there is a cached current user, which means if the API gets the current user and the service also gets the current user, I have this really nice stored user for the current request, which it'll grab and use that cached one. So using these scoped services allows you to share things between different bits of logic and services that are happening in the same HTTP request. Super, super useful. Transient would not do this. It would, for every single service and every single dependency injection, it would be a new thing that wouldn't have any context of the state of the previous things, and it would have to grab the user again, it would have to grab the token again for every single service call, which sometimes you're going to want. rarely, but sometimes you do want that. Just keep in mind, the complicated part comes in when you try to mix and match these. Generally, unless you manage to hack it somehow, which I've seen people try. Don't try to break the rules. Generally, it's going to be the longer lived things can be injected into the shorter lived things, because that makes sense. Because if you inject something into something else and it dies first, then it's going to give you an absolute headache. So you can run into errors if you try to inject something that is shorter lived, and it will freak out and you will get confused. But just remember this video, and remember, scoped means per request. Transient means basically per injection. And what's it called? I just completely blanked out on the word singleton. Singleton is throughout the entire life of the application. So just keep in mind that. And a lot of times, if you're using like 87 transients and you're like, wow, I hit the database so many times, perhaps you should consider using something that is scoped, that will remember things, and you can do a little bit of caching on the server side. It never hurts to use a little bit of cache. A little bit of extra cache never hurts. See, double meaning. Anyways, I hope that cleared it up a little bit. There's a lot of really cool things you can do in C# and .NET, and these services and dependency injection are critical to your success. Really, I started out not using DI, and once I started using DI, I realized that my life was a lie and that I should have been using it the whole time. So please go ahead. Learn how to use singletons, how to use scoped services, understand where you can use them, where you should use them. Remember that entity framework is your friend, and it actually will be scoped if you use it normally. And that when you use find async, which I'm telling you, all over the place. There is find async all over the place. Because this planet member, get async, this right here, if it's already been gotten during that request, it's going to grab it from cache, and it's going to be beautiful. So yeah. Entity framework works beautifully with this dependency injection and scoping, and just keep that in mind. And hopefully you understand. You get it. All right. See you all next time. Peace out.